And they identified a bullet found on I believe it was on the gurney where Conley was.
Okay.
That then came out of that gun.
Yeah, unfortunately they have discrepancies on that because the guy who found it, his name was Daryl Tomlinson, said that he found it on a stretcher that wasn't. I mean, he could have been mistaken, but you see what I'm saying.
There's a lot of
they've thrown more coal.
Well, I talked with the girl, Peggy Vaughn, who was constable over in Oak Cliff, was there, and his wife was the head nurse. I talked with her myself that Friday night because I went out there to see Conley and his wife. Really his wife. I went to school with both of them. And she said she found it on the gurney that Scott was on, and she had the bullet in her hand and showed it to me. But see, this is right after the shooting, and I said, you ought to give that to homicide.
Yeah.
But be sure you trace the chain of command.
It was a nurse, you're saying a nurse?
The head nurse there.
The head nurse found this?
And her name was?
What was her name?
Vaughn, I think. Her husband.
Okay.
I don't know the name.
Yeah, all I can think of is Audrey Bell, but that's not.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, all I know, she showed me a bullet and said, I took this off. I said, where'd you get it? She said, I took it off of the gurney that Conley was on.
Huh.
That don't mean necessarily that bullet is the one that went through Conley.
Yeah.
You know, they were putting them on gurneys out there.
She actually showed it to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When
was that? Was that?
It was 4 o'clock or
on Friday.
Friday night.
Friday night at 4.
Yeah. And I told her to give that to homicide, where they could trace the where she found it.
You said they were putting them on gurneys. You meant in reference to?
Well, I mean, you bring a bunch
body. Yeah.
The people are put on gurneys at the scene, but you may be moving them to another to go in the operating room or something.
Yeah. And as far as you know, she did hand it over to somebody?
I don't,
you don't know.
I just told her to. She said she would.
Yeah.
But she showed me a bullet there, and I said, well, you don't have business of that. Homicide ought to have it.
We're here with Elizabeth Wright, Elizabeth Good, that
I was right at that time.
at that time, that worked at Parkland Hospital, and we do want to credit Mr. Henry Wade, who first mentioned you, although he got the name wrong, but he had the right person in mind. And then later, Dr. Crenshaw found you for Wallace Milam, who I believe came by and spoke with you here.
Well, that's correct.
And then a friend of mine, Roger Miles, mentioned that and made me aware of it. And then that's how I found you. But we really appreciate, the time that you're giving us to talk. And at what time did you start working for Parkland Hospital?
July 14th, 1962.
And in what capacity were you?
Director of Nursing.
Director of Nursing. And of course, on November 22nd, 1963, you were working at that time?
I was working at Parkland, but I was at a workshop that morning.
And did you say that earlier that morning you spoke with your sister on the phone?
Yes.
And she said that...
Before we went to the workshop.
Right, and she said that it was raining, but the sun had come out, and something about that she felt something might happen to President Kennedy.
Yes, she said, she was crying, and she said, I'm afraid he's going to get killed.
And did you feel that she made premonitions before, or?
Yes, she has had a great, well, I can't say a great many, but a number of, I can't say her predictions, but a number of things along this line in her life. She was able to have some idea of impending doom.
And at what time did you hear that President Kennedy had been shot?
I can't tell you the exact time. It was shortly after noon, and we were having lunch.
And then you headed for the hospital?
As soon as I heard it, they were teasing me about the president being there, and they were saying, "You shouldn't be here. You should be there taking care of the president in case they need you." And I laughed and said, "Of course they're not going to need me," and continued with my lunch. And the next thing I knew, somebody called and said, "The president's been shot." And I thought, there they go again. Went in and saw it on television and absolutely could not believe it.
From that point, did you speak to your sister about what she'd said earlier, or?
Not at that point, because then I knew I had to get back to the hospital and it was going to take a few minutes. So I called my husband. He, of course, was down directing security. And my night supervisor was still there, so she, if you'll pardon the expression, drove like a bat out of hell to the Parkland campus. It was surrounded with all the police and everybody. And it was obvious that I could not get in by vehicle, so I got out of the car and, as I told you earlier, spoke to the policeman of the highest rank I could find, who was a captain. "Please help me get in," because I had work to do, and explained why. He said, "No, ma'am, I can't get you in. Nobody can take you in." And I said, "But I've got to go." And he said, "Well, if you go at your own risk, and don't be surprised if you get shot in the back." Well, needless to say, nobody bothered me. I got in and was able to do my thing from there on.
And you actually was in the room with Connolly and also took care of him and did some work in that.
Well, that was long after the initial excitement. Well, not long after that. After the president's body and his entourage had gone, and of course the Johnsons, who were also there, soon to be President and Mrs. Johnson, were in another part of the hospital awaiting to find out what was happening, because then they knew he was then president. And as soon as all that was over, I went up to the operating room, or Steve Landrigan, who was one of the assistant administrators, asked me to go up and take care of Mrs. Connolly, meet her needs, keep her informed of what was going on in the operating room concerning him, and take care of anything that she might want or need. She was a delightful lady, and I was happy to work with her, and did exactly as instructed, and was there, quite late in the evening, till he was out of surgery and in recovery room, and she was doing as well as she could, and all the Connollys had been fed in our two separate dining rooms, and it was a long day.
I imagine it was a very tough time.
Yes, it was.
Did you see President Kennedy at all at that time, or?
No, not at all. The Secret Service would not allow me in the part of the emergency room in which he was located. And I said, "But my supervisor needs me," and he said, "Well, if she needs you, she'll call you, but you don't go in unless she does." And in the meantime, my assistant director had said, "Don't go in there or they'll throw you down the hall like they've done everybody else." And I couldn't see myself sailing down that hall, so I did as I was supposed to, but talked with Doris Nelson, the supervisor, as soon thereafter as I possibly could.
And there were some people that got thrown out, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, all over the place.
Yeah.
My assistant's expression there was they're coming out of there like bouncing balls.
And at the same time you worked at Parkland Hospital, your husband, O.P. Wright,
That's correct.
was the head of security?
That's right.
And how long had he been the head of security there?
Well, he had been responsible for security since, as well as the personnel department, since he came, which I believe was in 61. I got there in 62. I'm not positive of that date, but it was either 60 or 61.
And as I told you earlier, I had an interview with the former district attorney of Dallas, Henry Wade, and he had mentioned you in this interview. He got the name wrong, but he did say that a head nurse at the hospital had shown him a bullet, and he said she had the bullet in her hand. And I said, he said, where did you get this? And she said something effective, I got it off Connolly's stretcher. And he said, well, you should turn that over to homicide. And the history has recorded that that Daryl Tomlinson, who worked in the hospital, had found this bullet on a stretcher and had given it to your husband.
And orderly in the emergency room. Well, to find a bullet in the bedding on a stretcher is nothing outstanding or unusual. So that's why Otis said, well, you might want this for a souvenir. It's a bullet that Daryl found on the stretcher. At least it was the same day. And so I took it and still have it. But, of course, there's no resemblance of that bullet to the one I have.
Oh, I see. They said that your husband gave the bullet to a Secret Service agent. And, I mean, that's all we know up to that point. And the bullet that he gave him was similar to this one.
Mm-hmm.
Does the bullet that you have resemble that? And
Not at all. If you'd like to see it, I'll be happy to show it to you. But no, it doesn't look anything like that.
Okay. Yes, if you would, I'd be happy to.
Hold the phone a minute
Great.
and I'll get it.
All right, well, thank you. Take a look at that. If you'd like to hold that up. Oh, that's really, wow.
That might have done a worse job than that one did. I don't know that much about bullets.
Now, that's a bullet that you got from your husband that day.
Right. That day.
That day.
Well, late that evening. Well, now, it might not. I couldn't tell you whether it was that evening or the next day or the day after.
Okay.
Because everything was in such an uproar that I can't tell you minute by minute what I did.
Oh, okay. That's all right.
Good residence.
1 week.
Well, and this is a doctor who's after something.
Now, this is a book from John Connolly's book, and he did say something about a head nurse that picked up a bullet, or he heard something fall off a stretcher.
In his condition?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Maybe you could read that out loud, and maybe we can piece that together a little bit.
Well, I'll have to get my glasses together.
Oh, okay. Or would you like me to read it?
You read it.
Okay.
Now I'll tell you if it's right.
Alrighty.
To my recollection.
Sure. He says, but the most curious discovery of all took place when they rolled me off the stretcher and onto the examining table. A metal object fell to the floor with a click no louder than a wedding band. The nurse picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. It was the bullet from my body, the one that passed through my back, chest, and wrist, and worked itself loose from my thigh.
Well, now, if I remember correctly, they took him directly to the operating room from the car in which they were riding, because we have an elevator immediately inside that goes right up to the operating room. And to the best of my knowledge, that took place there. But the bedding on that stretcher, as I recall, was gray, which is operating room color, and it was gray, and that's not unusual because we switch stretchers intermittently depending on who needs the most at what time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not to say the operating room table, but the stretcher, or some people say gurney, for transportation back and forth.
Right.
And it has a little shelf underneath, and that's where the as I recall being told, the bullet was rolled up in that those bed sheets.
Those bed sheets.
However, Audrey Bell, who was the operating room supervisor at that time, was a very astute operating room supervisor, and had someone heard it, or had he heard it and said anything to her or to any of the nurses, I'm sure that they would have been astute enough to keep that as evidence.
Right.
So I can't say Connolly didn't hear it and this did not happen, but I see flaws in the testimony.
Okay. Do you think that, I mean, do you feel that that bullet is part of any evidence, or do you feel that
No, I really don't.
it's... Okay.
I honestly don't. And I don't think Otis would have given it to me had he thought it was, because he'd been in police work long enough. You don't do that.
Your husband.
Right.
Right.
But I've kept it all these years because it was there. That's all. I do know it was there, but I don't know anything more about it, the background. And obviously it has not been shot.
Obviously, yes. Your husband, I never saw him on any TV show that I can recall. Was he told or asked not to?
We were all asked not to. And there's only one person who was asked not to on my staff, to my knowledge, appeared on television without permission.
And that was...
Cannot tell you.
Okay. In your professional opinion, how do you feel about the doctor saying that, you know, the wound in Kennedy's throat was a wound of entrance and the wound in his head was a wound of exit? Did you have a opinion on that, or?
When I was a child, I was an expert marksman. But comes World War II and my presence there for 3 years, after that I gave up having anything to do with anything that shoots or any kind of bullets. So ballistics is something I know nothing about. I know that there were a number of hypotheses. One that it went in this time here and came out here blowing off, and the other that it went in here and having expended its energy came out here. But how then could it have hit Connolly and done the damage there?
Right.
So I can't say. I don't know.
Well, John Connolly has always said that the bullet that went through Kennedy, or the first shot, was not the one that hit him, because he did not hear the shot that hit him when he felt a blow in the back. But as you are well aware of, he had 4 inches of his fifth rib destroyed and his radius bone in his wrist. And the bullet in the National Archives pretty much resembles this bullet, except for the base, of course, is not flattened. Mm-hmm. And they just wondered, how could a bullet with a tip like that do the damage to break 2 bones in Governor Connolly and remain in that near pristine condition? And that's kind of what people were wondering.
Of course, if it had gone in the back of the head, it would have had to pierce the skull, which is hard, and go through the soft brain tissue, soft tissue, the brain, which is soft, mm-hmm. and then come out the throat, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I do not believe that one bullet did all that damage. I mean, going on to Connolly. Well, I think it possibly, as I say, I'm no expert, it maybe could have done everything that was done to Kennedy, but I don't see how it could have gone on.
And did all that damage.
Did that to Connolly.
Well, you're in good company, because even the pathologist from Bethesda...
I'll call him good company.
Well, that's true. You're right.
It's not for me to say.
If Earl Rose would have done that autopsy, it would have been as clean as a hound's tooth, as they say.
Right.
But he did testify that he couldn't see how a bullet that looked like this could have broke 2 bones in the governor and left fragments, I believe, in his thigh and in his wrist. And I'm not sure if it was in his chest too, but that was just the thing that I didn't know. And you weren't allowed to go on TV either, were you? If someone would have asked you to. Oh.
That was just, it was, I didn't consider it ethical for me to do because I had no real knowledge that was pertinent to the crime, which I think it was. Had I, of course, I would have divulged it immediately in order to save dilemmas and whatever else is. But what I saw was strictly as a bystander. I was not actually involved.
And you were familiar with the procedure for tracheostomy?
Oh, yes.
Incisions?
Right.
To facilitate breathing in the tracheal tube?
Right.
And you say that that type of incision was no more than...
Well, you can do it with a pocket knife. And, of course, it's not a good idea. But in an emergency situation, so that gives you an idea of how large the incision would be, not very large.
Have you seen the autopsy photo of Kennedy, the throat wound? Have you seen that?
Yes.
Could I show it to you? Or?
No, I'm
Okay.
familiar with
You're
it.
familiar with it.
Right. In fact, I've got many books on him here. And I'm familiar with that. And I've seen
The pictures seem to show a pretty large gaping, a bigger wound than would be characteristic with a tracheostomy incision. Do you have an opinion on that, or?
Well, not one that's well grounded, except just my own knowledge as a nurse. That's the doctor's prerogative to say I better not practice medicine because I'm not supposed to do that.
Well, but Malcolm Perry was considered an artist with the blade. He was pretty
good. He was very good, but he wouldn't have made a hole like that.
Right. Because it really...
I didn't see it personally. I saw pictures of it, but it doesn't stand to reason, I don't think.
It's really just an incision to put a tube in.
That's all a tracheostomy is.
Yeah.
And it could have been used for other purposes, but as I said, that's really not my baby.
Well, we really appreciate your time because I know what a tough time that was and how traumatic it was, and if you'd like to just say anything as to your personal feelings as to how you felt or the city of Dallas might have felt, and for that type of a tragedy to happen, and how it affected you personally.
Well, of course, I felt heartbroken for the nation, for the young, vibrant president who had so much to do, and for his wife, who was so heartbroken and just so absolutely distressed. It's true that the political situation in the state was in turmoil at that time, and that was common knowledge in the paper. And many different factions of Democrats and Republicans, and just all kinds of weird things going on. So I can see why people would think, well, just wherever their mind might have wanted to take them. I was very amazed at the behavior of the Secret Service and their attitude toward our what about Earl Ray, who wanted to do the autopsy here?
Earl Rose, yeah.
Earl Rose, who wanted to do the autopsy here and was not allowed to because federal law supersedes
And there was never any questions about the Oswald or Tippett autopsy. They were done right down the line.
Well, that doctor knew precisely what he was doing, in my opinion. This medical school only hires the very best, and
That's right.
we all know that.
That's right.
We finally got the emergency room, or Jack Price, our administrator, got the emergency room divided so that we could still treat those persons who had to have medical attention, and left the portion that the president and his entourage needed there. As soon as everything was over and settled down a little bit, our administrator asked us to write immediately that day our first-hand recollection of what had happened. And everybody did, from the lowliest orderly who found the stretcher with the bullet on it to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a heart-rending report of agony, shame, sense of personal loss, just heart-rendering. But a beautiful tribute to the president and to his wife. And
your sister was right.
yeah, my sister was chief stewardess for Delta Airlines at the time, and thought, like many people did, that John Kennedy was just about the finest person in the whole wide world. And when his plane landed, it was raining, drizzling a little bit, and then it started to clear up as the entourage moved out. And after it had gone, she called me and said she was crying. And I said, "So Marinelle, what's the matter?" She says, "He's not going to make it. They're going to kill him. He's going to get shot." To such a point that my husband sent a car over to Delta Airlines, picked her up, and brought her over to my office, where she stayed until we were ready to go home, and then stayed with me until the whole thing, as far as from what happened then to Oswald's death, she was so agonized that she was with us all that time.
Wow. Well, I imagine that was a very,
it was
very
hard for her.
traumatic, and she it must have affected her
very much.
very much so.
Always did, because she just loved him very much, admired him a great deal.
Well, Miss Good, we really appreciate your time, and I thank you very much.
Well,
and I
I'm
also
glad I'm not being of any help, but I'm just confirming or not affirming whatever information you might have about it, insofar as I saw it or knew it.
Well, you were there and I wasn't, and that's the key right there.
It was hectic, but controlled chaos, we'll say.
Well, that's a beautiful
And
thing.
I'm proud of what the hospital, what the medical staff, what all of us did that day, because after that was over, we began to get in hate mail like mad. And I couldn't understand it, because I felt so proud of us, and we had tried so hard. And then to have so many people, even had one mother write to me personally and says, "I'm not going to let my daughter go to TW nursing school because it's associated with that place, and that place doesn't do anything but kill presidents."
Oh, that's terrible.
And I thought, well, lady, that's your prerogative, but you don't have it quite straight.
Well, those are people that don't know what they're talking about, and those kind of people are just best ignored.
But you find that in any traumatic
Right.
situation. You gotta have a scapegoat, so something that's not gonna rebound on you and hurt you is usually the one something you pick out to do.
Well, as people look back on this case, they look at the efforts done by you and others at Parkland Hospital, and it was quite admirable, even by today's standards, for trying to resuscitate a man that was literally dead before he was even brought into the hospital.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. But I think we did our job, and we're proud of it.
Well, I think so too, and I'm very proud of you for giving me this time.
Well, I'm glad to share it with you.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're quite welcome.
District Attorney Henry Wade, who convicted Ruby of murder, and who would have tried Oswald, there are only a few loopholes in the Warren Commission report. Perhaps the biggest, the single or magic bullet theory.
Some would say that to believe the Warren Commission report, you have to believe this magic bullet theory. The fact that the bullet may have gone through Kennedy and then through Connolly, then struck him in his arm and then struck him through the thigh. Do you think that magic bullet theory is a correct one?
I doubt whether that's correct, but I have no way of proving otherwise.